Hi everybody, welcome back. Glad you could tune in again. Okay, let's take a look at the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth picks up from the previous book in the Bible, the book of Judges, which, as you recall, if you've listened to the video introducing that book, is part of a single continuous narrative stretching all the way back to the book of Genesis. In the book of Judges, we see several hundred, 300 or 400 years of Israel's failure to live faithfully in the land after the death of the first generation in the conquest under the leadership of Joshua. And by the end of the book, you've got 4 or 5 chapters of utter carnage, chaos, violence and depravity. And you wonder how anything ever could emerge from such a social disaster area. The last verse of the book of Judges hints at the solution, but without providing a solution. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And you're left with this thought, maybe if we had the right kind of king, everything could be different. That's the question that the book of Ruth picks up. If we had the right kind of king, could things be different? And the book of Ruth tells the story of how God somehow, from the chaos of the book of Judges, brought forth his chosen king for the people of God. It begins, chapter 1, verse 1, in the days when the judges ruled, and ends, chapter 4, verse 22, Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. The very last word of the book is its theological climax, the king who will rule over the people of God and bring them unprecedented peace and righteousness and stability. So, how do they get there? Well, the book of Ruth tells the story, and I recall teaching through this in a series of devotions previously, so I won't labour in lots of details, but maybe helpful just to give a sketch, a kind of bird's eye view of the whole book in short order, just so you're reminded of it and you know what you're jumping into if you jump into one of these 4 chapters. It's only 4 chapters, so you probably should just read it from the beginning. It only takes about 10 minutes. So, chapter 1, we begin in the days of the judges in one of the dark periods. There's famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem called Elimelech takes his wife Naomi and his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion in search of food to Moab. There, in the neighbouring country of Moab, tragedy follows them, and for reasons unspecified, Elimelech and his 2 sons die, but not before both of them have married, and so Naomi, his wife, is left with her 2 daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. It just looks like she's going to live out the remaining few days that she has in misery and poverty in a land where she doesn't really know the language and is completely bereft of all those whom she has loved for many years. But then she hears in Moab that the Lord has come to the aid of his people to provide food for them, and she thinks, well, maybe I should go back to Judah, to Bethlehem, and see if I can make a life for myself there. There's a conversation in chapter 1 in which Ruth resolves to go with Naomi and accompany her back to Bethlehem, and so at the end of chapter 1 the 2 of them arrive there, and Naomi is still a little bit grumpy and upset by everything, perhaps understandably. There's Ruth at her side, and the question arises, well, how on earth are these 2 women, one an elderly widow, the other a foreigner, probably doesn't speak the language very much if at all, who is also probably not likely to find a godly husband in Bethlehem in the days of the judges, how are either of these women going to survive, even though the Lord has provided food for his people? The answer to that question is provided in chapter 2, when Ruth summons up the courage and commitment and determination to go and seek food for herself and Naomi, and in God's kind providence she stumbles into the field of a man named Boaz, who is a close relative and a redeemer, very significant term in the book of Ruth, a redeemer, kinsman redeemer of the family of the late Elimelech, the husband of Naomi. Chapter 2, he gets to know her. He gets to know Ruth, that is. Boaz, is deeply impressed with her character, and their relationship starts to develop. And in chapter 3, at Naomi's encouragement, Ruth basically issues a marriage proposal to him, asking him to take her and her mother into his household and to provide for her. Who will provide for the barren woman and the bereft daughter-in-law, if not this Redeemer from Bethlehem? Might remind you of somebody. Anyway, he commits himself to do that. He remarks that he's an older man and she hasn't gone chasing after one of the younger men. She's come after him. He seems almost somewhat flattered that she would do so. But nonetheless, he highlights that there's a problem, that there's another redeemer who has a prior legal claim on marriage to Ruth or Naomi, and to the assets of land which they have from Naomi's late husband. So that presents a problem, and then that problem has to be resolved in chapter 4. Boaz is immensely shrewd in the way that he handles what basically amounts to a court case in Ruth chapter 4, and he secures for himself the hand of Ruth in marriage and the future and security for both Naomi and Ruth in this new household, the household of the Redeemer, Boaz. Before very long, Boaz and Ruth conceive a child, and the book ends with a genealogy that stretches all the way back to Perez, who fathered Hezron, Ram, Aminadab, Nahshon, Solomon, Boaz, Obed, Jesse, and David. And so what then the concluding genealogy is saying is that this unlikely pair of people, Ruth the Moabite widow and Boaz the elderly gentleman who himself had not married, somehow were used by God to bring about the birth of their great-grandson, the Messiah, the anointed King David, who would be the key to Israel's resurrection, really, out of the dust and ashes of the book of Judges. It's an astonishing and wonderful story, and one of the things, of course, it highlights is the things that God are doing in the world, the things that God is doing in the world that are most significant are not always the things that we think are most significant. We might imagine that during the days of the Judges, the most significant things that are happening are the affairs of state, or the battles among the Philistines with Samson and so on, or the epic visits of Ehud to Eglon's throne room in chapter 3, where the assassin takes out the Moabite king and tyrant. We might think that those are the most significant things going on in the world around us, but no. The most significant thing that's happening in the whole of the land of Israel during those years is this young woman picking up bits of grain in the corner of a barley field, and the concern and thoughtfulness of an elderly gentleman who owns the field and is watching her. It's not always not always the case that the things that look most significant for the future of the people of God are most significant. Sometimes God is doing very significant things through little details which look to us like almost nothing at all, but which turn out to be absolutely momentous. Some of the lessons and themes that pop up in the book of Ruth. I hope that's helpful. The Lord bless you, and I hope very much to see you soon. Bye for now.